Okay, so I've got the Vuforia demo. I've got these two empty, they were empty game objects, I think, at the beginning. Each one of them has a target image that is being used to target, that Vuforia engine is using to target. And then other stuff is being, let me hide this first. So again, in the inspector, you can select the game object from the hierarchy and just turn it off to hide it. Okay, so again, moving from this constitution, I'm going to go to assets. And I think I have this PNG here in textures. But you know, I'm not going to use it as a texture. I'm going to use it as a sprite. So I'm going to rename this folder sprites. And I'm going to, into this sprites folder, I'm going to drag in all the other files that I set up in Illustrator and then exported as transparent PNGs. I'm going to select all of these at once in my, so I'm in my project folder. I renamed my texture folder sprites. I'm selecting all of these, and where it says texture type, I'm going to use Sprite 2D and UI instead of the default, because these are 2D sprites. So when I make a change like that, if I scroll down in the inspector, and this is, so right now, this is inspector is being applied to all of these. I can hit apply. And now each one of these is now a transparent file. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to constitution in the hierarchy. And I'm going to go ahead and create an empty game object. And I'm going to rename it. So let's see. What should I'll name it? I don't know, animated history. Okay, and into this, I'm going to pile in all of these. I'm going to put them in an order. I'm going to think about the order that I want these to show up in. So actually, you know what? Let's do this a little differently so we can test as we go. I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to assets. And inside of scenes, when you first open a Unity project, there's a sample scene. So I'm going to utilize the sample scene. And the reason I'm going to do that is because, I'm going to save, okay. The reason I'm going to do it in a sample scene is so that we can see what's happening as we go along, and I don't have to pull up my iPad and see what's going on. So in sample scene, once again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to name it animated history. You can use spaces. Yeah, I'll use spaces. Unity doesn't care. Okay, think of an empty game object as an empty directory or folder, and it's a way of grouping different game objects. And the transforms, the position, rotation, scale that exists for this empty game object, it is the parent transforms for everything that you put inside of it. So I'm going to jump over back to assets, go into my sprites, and I'm going to start adding these elements as children of this animated history. And oops. So I have kind of Togo talk bubble 0. So first Iroquois Nation, then I'll put then talk bubble 0, and one of the leaders of the Iroquois Confederacy when Benjamin was relatively young. I think he was present for a famous speech that Kanesatoga gave when Benjamin Franklin was 38 years old. Okay, so one thing that I want to point out is I purposely named these files with 0 and 1, 0 with the first one. So first this guy talks, then this guy talks, and then this guy talks again, this guy talks last. So everything in the computer world, and as far as Unity cares, when we start using C# begins with 0. Like any numbering begins with 0, not 1. So, so this is kind of a useful point to keep in mind. Now, this thing, if I scroll out, is pretty huge for this world. So I think I'm gonna, in order to apply a scale change to all of them, I'm gonna choose the parent and resize this to, I don't know, try 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. Okay, and I'm going to put it on the y coordinate on 1. And just so that I can visualize this a little bit easier, I'm going to create outside of this empty game object, I'm going to create a plane. And I'm going to use this plane as the ground. Okay, so remember everything's in meters. So this plane is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, so approximately 3 feet. And I can see that the Kanesatoga's feet are below the ground. So I'm going to do 1.3, do 1.5. Okay, so if I check this now, I've got the camera is looking at this game object and it's on a plane. Okay, good. So I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to go ahead and open a new window that is the animation window. So there it is. So window, animation, animation, and it opened in, I'm going to resize it on my other screen. Okay, so this to some people might look familiar. It might look, you know, like Photoshop has an animation window, and basically what's up here are frames. It could be either frames or seconds. You can change, you can toggle between the two. And I'm going to select this game object because I want to animate all the pieces that are in here. So I'm going to select my grouped game objects that into what was an empty game object. And then I'm going to go to my animation window and click create. So what it's going to want to do is create a new anim or animation. And I'm going to not do it inside of sprites. I'm going to do it inside of assets. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call it animations. And go ahead and create that. So I'm going to call this animated history and save it. Okay, so now I've got this timeline is now live. I can, if ideally people have a 3D, a 3-button mouse, and you can use the scroll scroll thingy to resize the timeline. I mentioned that you can have it be frames or seconds. I'm going to stick to frames. And the frame rate by default is 60 frames per second. and I'm going to start adding properties. So how many people remember Premiere from 160 or maybe took motion graphics or intro to 2D animation and are familiar with After Effects? Anybody? Premiere, great. Markella, thank you. Okay, so can anybody describe what keyframes are? Anyone? No? Okay.
I can.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So when you said that, I immediately thought of like when you want to bring in an effect in Premiere, you basically have to tell it when you want it to come in and when you want it to leave. And so keyframes help you set that duration for a particular effect, whether that's like a filter or a motion graphic.
Great. So one way of thinking about it, and this comes back from stop motion animation. So the key animator would draw, imagine a character with their hand like this up, and then another keyframe with the hand like that. And so there would need to be a drawing of frame by frame of the hand moving, along a trajectory. So that's the in-betweens. And so usually not the head animator, unless it was like a solo studio, the other animators would draw the tween. The tween is the in-betweens, the where the magic happens that isn't from this frame to this frame, but the in-betweens or the tweening of keyframe A to keyframe B. And so this is now built into most time-based software that you can set coordinates and then let the application do the magic. So I'm going to hold my Option key down to turn this around, and I'm going to get over here. And so before I start animating, I want to go ahead and position these bubbles in relation to where I want them to be. So let's see, this is Tago. I'm probably destroying his name. So I'm going to position this, let's just use whole numbers 4 by 3. That's good enough. Maybe 3.5. Okay, so I can fiddle with it till I'm happy. And I'm going to do the same with the second one. That one's a little bigger, so I'm going to shift it. Okay. I want to position them so that they're pretty much in this virtually the same spot when the viewer is reading these. And now I'm going to take bends and position these where I want them. So I'm doing this before animating because I don't want to animate the positions. I just want to animate when they appear. I could animate the position. You can animate any of these transforms or transformations, position, rotation, scale. So let's see, maybe I'll round that to 7 and this one to -4.5. Okay, and I'll do the same with the other one. And you can see I'm clicking directly on them in the scene, or I'm using the hierarchy to select them. And then I can, depending on what tool I'm using, such as the move tool, I can move them on the XYZ coordinate, or I can use their inspector to move them. So -4.5 take it up to 7, see where that lands, and then I'm gonna bring it down. Oops. The other one's covering it, so I'm gonna hide it. You can see the ordering of things, that the layering happens whatever is last in the hierarchy is on top of whatever is above. Okay, so let's see, where is, I'm gonna use 5 and what happens if I use 7? Okay, that's good. All right, so I have these positioned where I want, and now I want just to start animating. So the initial drawing, the first thing I'm gonna do is have them kind of, just kind of moving, bobbing up and down. And right now you can see it's at the 0, 0, 0 coordinate, because what I changed is where the parent is. So I put the parent at the 1.5, and that positioned everything above this ground. So now I can start playing with, thinking about doing this kind of animation. So I'm going to go into my animation window. And remember, this animation window is created on animated history. It's based on animated history. So I can use the animation window to animate any of the game objects that are nested inside of animated history. So I'm going to add a property, and you can see when I add a property, I can do a transform to the entire grouped game object, or I can do individual transforms. So I want to mess around with the position of the Iroquois and I want to mess around with the position. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. These diamonds represent keyframes. And so there's a keyframe from 1 to 60. And so here it's at 0, and here it should be at 0. So I'm going to go in between these two, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a key. Okay. So here, when I collapse this, you can see the values for position specifically for that transform. And so I want it bobbing up and down on the y coordinate. So I'm going to see what 0.5 does. Okay, so now I can see it's moving that way. So if I had left this outside of the group and animated it independently, I could just, have this in its own timeline and just have it looping over and over and over and over. But I put it in the grouped area. So this means I want these 3 frames repeated over and over and over. So let's pick this one first, and I'm going to do a Command C to copy. I wonder if I can copy here. Now I'll stick with Command C to copy. And I'm going to go over 30 frames to 90 and paste it. So now I've got this movement. So I want this to continue over many seconds. Let's see. So this is 0.5. So now I'm just going to select all of these. And I'm going to Command C to copy. And I'm going to jump over to 120 to 30 frames later. And I can check what frame I'm on here where it says 120. And I'm going to paste that. And I don't know, I'll do this over a 5-second period. I'm using the scroll on my mouse to make the timeline a little bit smaller. I'm going to go to 240 and paste this. And to select them all. Let's see. Expand this so I can see them. Select them all and copy them and do it one more time. So 360. And I can type it in here, the exact frame. As it gets smaller and smaller, it gets a little harder to go to the, oops. No. 360 return and make sure that I'm on timeline. Okay. Come on, paste. There we go. All right. Good enough. So I have this now looping over several seconds. I can play it and see it doing its thing. If I wanted to slow it down, I could, you see how there's, there's a selection, there's these blue lines. I can actually use those blue lines to extend how long something is animated. All right, so I'm gonna deselect everything. Go ahead and collapse that one and add some more properties. So the first one is this bubble. And I'm going to make is active. So is active is it viewable? So I'm going to make a keyframe based on whether it's active or not. Right now it's check marked, so I'm going to uncheck mark it. And I could do the same with all of them. Maybe I'll do them one at a time. So I want there to be, I don't know, a second or so before the first frame goes in. And so I'm going to turn it off. And I'm going to go to 1 second and turn it on. So Ben is quite heavy. I'll leave that available for, I don't know. I can fiddle with this later, so I'll leave that available. I'm just gonna go seconds, just to keep things quick. And at 120, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off. So as soon as I turn it off, it generated a keyframe. So it's available from 160 to 119, and then at 120, it's gone. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same for all the other ones. So the next one is Ben talk, and I'm going to turn on is active. Okay. Now at the first frame, I'm going to turn it off, and you guys ask questions as we go along. So what did I do? I want it to be at the first frame. So I want to be on frame 0. I'm going to turn off Ben's initial bubble. And then I'm going to go to 2 seconds. Actually, you know what? After, I'm going to do it at 120 once the first bubble for Kanasatoga is turned off. I'm going to turn on Ben's bubble so we can read them one at a time. Now, I want that to be turned off after, again, I'm going to do seconds. I can pull them out later to make them stick around longer, but just to keep everything to not be scrolling on the timeline. So now I'm going to turn that off. I think it's hidden. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add another property, and I'm just doing these one at a time. So the next bubble, again, turned off at the beginning, and then at 240 turned on. And lastly, the next one, which is Ben's bubble. You know what? I'm going to scroll back to 1, add 0, add property, Ben talk, and is active. So I'm going to turn it off and then go to 240 and turn it on. Wait, not 240, sorry. I'm going to go a second later to 360, or not, yeah, more than a second later, a couple seconds later. And turn off kind of Satoga's second bubble and turn on Ben Franklin's. Okay, let's see what this looks like. I'm going to save this and I'm going to go back to 0 and play it. Okay, so it's very fast as I pop through. And what I can do is just start thinking about slowing all of these down. So I can choose them individually, or I can choose them in a group and stretch them out. And that way, stretch out how long each bubble stays open. And I know it's, you know, like the later ones are going to be, and I can see that my trot is already finished by how far I stretch those. And the trot was a little fast, so I want to slow that down too. So I'm going to pull that out. Okay. I'm going to save this. And actually, I want to test it on screen. Ben is quite heavy. The Iroquois Confederacy has the oldest constitution of North America. Ben loves coming to our gathering and eating all the food. And then, okay, so I need to clean that up and basically just move around the keyframes so that things aren't overlapping. And I can scrub across the timeline to see what's going on. Okay, so the second one, and this is where it's really important to like make sure to name your files so that they're easy to manage. Okay, let's see. Second bubble. I'm trying to remember what I have. And you can delete any keyframe. So like, I'm just moving things around so that they're not overlapping. Okay, so now they're not overlapping, at least those two. And so here I can just, yeah, start moving them around. And what we've seen is that you can apply transforms, such as specifically position, rotation, scale. You can turn things on and off. You can look at this as a drop sheet, but you can also look at it as curves and make changes using curves that can have things ease in, ease out. But I'm just keeping things like trying to keep it as straightforward as possible. Okay, so I'm gonna be not 100% satisfied, but satisfied enough. I mean, I could keep tweaking and tweaking the timeline. You know, the bubbles probably would make sense to kind of toggle up and down. I noticed that why is the last one behind? Let's see. This bubble, why is that bubble happening? I'm noticing it's behind Ben when I play it, and I don't see why. Oh, it's just that, okay. I'm gonna move it over just to make sure that doesn't happen. And I want to move on to other things. So I could keep fiddling with this, but in general, do people get a sense or an understanding of what the animation window does? I should have moved it. Once you start fiddling with it, it's best to just fiddle with it in the animation window. Questions?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there is a way, like say that there were an opacity setting that would let you say fade in and fade out using keyframes.
Yeah, you know, as far as I know, I think I need to script that. I have to add a script because let's see what happens if add a new property. So there is sprite renderer. And
I was just wondering if that was what those curves did that you were looking at before.
Well, so the curves allow you to play with the speed of how things come in and out. So in, the head Disney animators back in the 60s, I think, wrote a book, a key book in animation that talks about the concepts such as ease in, ease out, in order to make things less robotic and more natural, the movements. And so you can use curves to sort of have things come in slowly and then come out fast. But I've never tried a fade in the timeline. So I'm curious to see what this color. So if I set the RGB A, there's alpha for A. So I'm going to set the alpha to 0. And that has it disappear. Now at 30 seconds, I'm going to set the alpha to 1. And now, and it does a fade. So there you go.
Thank you. Wow.
Yeah. And you can see there's a lot more, when you go to add property, you choose which game object specifically, and then there's sprite render. So the transforms are just the basic one, right? Position's not here because I'm already using it here, but rotation and scale are there. And then there's a sprite renderer. And these, I would say, if it's not kind of receive shadow, if it's not clear, like color is pretty straightforward. I understand what color is, but there's going to be other things here that are going to be new to us. So I think the best thing is just to experiment. Okay, I want to keep going. So any other questions? Oh, now that text box is on top. Okay. Okay, so I am going to close my animation. I'm fine with it. Again, we could keep playing and playing and playing. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to take this entire animated history and I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go to my scenes folder. In my assets folder, I'm going to go to scenes and I'm going to jump to my Vuforia scene. So in my Vuforia scene, I have this constitution that has this target image. And so instead of animated history, I'm going to delete that. And so here, I'm going to go ahead and paste animated history. It's outside of constitution. I can see that because I want it to be indented like the Iroquois. So I'm going to bring it over here. And so everything that I just did in the scene where I could see it is now available here. It's way too big, since it uses meters and the target image is 8.5 by 11 or so. This is a giant game object. So I am going to scale the whole thing down. I'm going to try 0.02. And return. Scroll into it. Where's my page? There you are. I'm going to turn on. And I'm going to put this. There it is. Okay, so I needed to get it back to 0, 0, 0 coordinate in order to see it in relation, because by default, when I put a game object in the hierarchy, it's always going to be at the 0, 0, 0 coordinate. If I just drag and drop it into my game space or scene, it'll drop wherever I put it. I like putting things in the hierarchy because it just makes more sense to me. Now I need to orient this to the same to reflect the image. So I'm going to rotate it. I always get confused with these. So I'm going to do this trial and error. 90 degrees, great. 90 degrees on the X coordinate. I'm going to have it float up on the Y. Maybe, I don't know, 0.2. No, that's too much. 0.1. Still too much. 0.05. 3. Yeah, I'm going to go with 0.03. Okay, 0.04. And I think I'm happy. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to test it. So I didn't want to, printing stuff is so expensive because of how much these cartridges cost. So that's why I'm using this iPad to show the image. Okay. Good. Satisfied. Again, I could tweak with time, move my keyframes like that. Definitely bend is heavy. I don't want it. And then it loops. So it could keep looping over and over and over. Okay, so if I didn't want it to loop, I can go to my assets. I have inside my animations, I have 2 new things that were created when I created that timeline. So this is going to be hopefully a lot clearer once we get to the next step. So this funny widget with what are supposed to be kind of like game objects connected to each other is an animation controller. So an animation controller allows you to map how animations relate to one another. And then the actual animation is this triangle with the little like wind things. So if I don't want an animation looping over and over, I can just turn off, I can select my animation and I can turn off loop time. So if I turn off loop time and test it, and it should only play once. Let's turn back. Yeah, so I didn't turn those off, and I can see one of them is back there. Yeah, that's funny. I would go back and clean this up, but I didn't turn them off, so they just stay. So, but the looping has effectively stopped. But in this case, I do prefer for it to loop. Okay, so I'm gonna, any questions before we move to the next step? And did everybody see how easy it is to just copy a game object, even if it's like a whole series of nested game objects inside a parent game object, and just paste it into a new scene? So I'm going to do the same with the next one, just so that we can skip using the Vuforia engine. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the web. And last week, there was, hopefully, I realized that this may be traumatic for people, but I'm using this Trump, low poly Trump. And please forgive me for taking the demos in that direction. So under today's date, there's 3D characters in animation using Adobe Mixamo. So I'm going to jump over to Mixamo. And this was a little independent outfit that Adobe bought a few years back. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with my Adobe login, which is my Hunter login. And continue. Skip this. If for whatever reason, if you don't have an Adobe login, you can create one. Mixamo is free. It's not tied to your, it doesn't have to be tied to your Adobe account. So Mixamo has characters and animations. Again, we're not doing 3D character building in this class. So we're going to be using all sorts of stuff that makes ready-made stuff available for us. And then it has all these animations, and you can use a search to find specific animations. So I found there's 3D Animator Character Builder who made this polygon Trump freely available. So I'm going to take last week's character and put it through Mixamo to rig it. So I'm going to upload the character. It's the one from last week. This was in week 04, files, and upload a character. Okay, so it has this auto rigger. So basically, in order to create animations, the software needs a bone structure. It needs joints that it understands, like the elbow's here, the wrist is here. So this is a quick way to rig up a character. So it's using the standard skeleton of 65 pieces. So I just need to tell it where approximately things are. So I'm placing the chin. I'm going to place the wrists, elbows, knees, and groin. All right. Now it's going to take that data and it's going to auto rig. So it's basically setting up a skeleton. So Unity has a rigging package. You can do this within Unity I find this much faster and easier and straightforward, but I'm not a 3D artist, 3D animator. But anyway, you could go to the package manager and download the Unity rigging package. Okay, this is fine. I'm gonna hit next. And now I want to download this fully rigged version of Trump. So I'm gonna click download, and I want it in the T pose. This is kind of default pose. Okay, so it should now be in my download folder. And I'm going to rename it Trump T-pose. And I'm going to go back into Unity, go to Assets. I already have characters here, and I have this version. That's the one. Actually, let me turn this off and turn now, since I'm switching to the attack. So I've got this character here. I'm not going to be using this anymore. I can delete that one. But actually, I'm going to leave it for now. But yeah, when I clean up my file, I would delete this one. I would delete this one because I'm no longer using this FBX. I'm going to use the one that I just downloaded. So I'm going to go ahead inside my characters folder. I'm going to go ahead and drop this Trump T-pose. Okay, so it's there. I could go ahead and place it in my, oh wait, you know what? I just remembered. I'm going to use the basic scene to assemble this. So I'm going to go to Assets, go to Scenes, and go to Sample Scene. I'm going to turn off Animated History. And I'm going to create a new empty game object. I'm going to name it Animated Trump. And I'm going to go ahead and place this guy, the one I just downloaded, there. Okay. Let's turn him around. I'm going to turn him around. Let's see. So which one is it? No. Okay, there. 180 on the Y. I see. This is why I'm not a 3D artist. Okay, so he's there. Now I need some animations. So I've got the character, I've downloaded the T-pose, it's all fully rigged. He's got 65 bones. I placed my joints where I want them, and I can maybe start off with an idle, I-D-L-E, an idle pose. What does this look like? Yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, I think this is the one I've used before. So you see there's all these settings. You can change his posture, bring down the breathing, stand, like all of these things you can play with to get kind of like what you want. I usually need, oh, I see. Let's do it at 100. Spread leg. And okay, so that looks good. So I'm going to download this animation. And do you see this is the right format, FBX. Oh, there's FBX for Unity. I did not use that. I just used FBX. So I'm going to stick with FBX, not necessarily with Unity. That'd be okay. So that would be a little bit of research. The skin, I don't need it. I already have the skin. So I'm going to say without skin. And so the way to think about this is that the animations are just a set of instructions. And this is the beauty of object-oriented programming and the way that you can connect scripts. So by downloading this idle without skin, I can apply this animation to any character I want, because I just want the instructions of how these joints and how it's animated, and that's what this file is going to contain. So I'm going to go ahead and download it, and there's my idle. Now I'm going to see. I think I did yelling. I'm not seeing the one. Ah, here is the one I wanted. Yeah, that's the one. So I'm going to go ahead and download this without skin. That's already set from the last time. Okay, downloaded. And I added also Mutant Jump. I did Jump and eventually found this funny Mutant Jump, which I remember. So I'm just going to go straight to it. And there's a few of them. I'm just going to not go with the crazy, really aggro one and go with the sort of slower. Okay, so I'm going to download that. Again, without a skin. And lastly, running. And I want to turn and run. Actually, I think this is the one. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. So obviously, I prepared, so I already have everything kind of in memory of what I'm looking for my particular idea. So I'm going to download running. Great. And I'm all set. I'm going to close this out and log out of this thing and close out Mixamo and get back to. So in the downloads folder, now I have running, mutant jumping, yelling, idle. I'm going to change and get rid of the mutant and just name it jumping. Doesn't really matter. But in assets, where it says animations, I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop 4 of these. Okay, so you can think about like if you were building a game and there are walking, running, jumping, crouching, idle, like all of these, everything that we're doing here applies to any type of project that you might be doing, regardless of AR or anything. Now, what happens, and maybe if I had done FBX for Unity, I wouldn't have to do this. Now that I think about it, I should have. I hadn't seen that. So what happens is Mixamo packages this thing that I need to do something tricky here, which all I want is just this animation. And they're all generically named Mixamo, which is not going to be helpful insofar as me, using these in the animation controller. So this step may not be necessary if I'd done FBX for Unity, but I didn't, so it is necessary. So please pay attention. Is everybody here with me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to choose the animation itself. I don't want this block, this game object. I just want the animation. And I'm going to do a Command D. So Command D pulls that, like it duplicates the animation, pulls it out of this container that downloads from Mixamo. So I'm going to do Command D. And as soon as I clicked Command D, there's now a freestanding animation called mixamo.com, but I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to rename it idle. Idle. Boom. Now I'm going to get rid of, I'm just going to delete this idle. Bye. Gone. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing for jumping, running, and yelling. Just select only the animation. Remember, the triangle with the little lines is the animation. I'm going to select it, Command D. Name, this is jumping. Name it and delete. Running, select only the animation, Command D. Name it running. Get rid of the one I downloaded. And last one, yelling. Oops. Once again, Command D, on PC, Control D, and yelling. All right. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and delete. Okay, now I want to assemble these animations. And this is, so we have animations, and in order to assemble the animations, I need to create like what was generated by when I created a timeline. I need to generate a controller, an animation controller. So I'm going to right click in my assets. I'm going to stay here in my animations, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to choose create, and I'm going to choose Animator Controller. And I'm going to call it Trump Tantrum. Okay, so this is by default. If you have your default layout, this is going to open a new panel in the center where this, right now I have scene, I have game. I'm not going to click the asset store, and I'm going to double click here. So this provides a graph where you can order how your animations run. So that, once again, there's this one was generated by the timeline. I didn't go through the step. When I hit create animation, it automatically created an animator controller. Here I did it from scratch. Have to hold the Option key to move things around. So with an animation, there's always an entry point, and this is where I'm going to start. I'm going to go from the entry point to idle. So as soon as I drop in the first animation, it automatically adds what's called transition to that animation. So it's orange because that's the first animation that's being run. If this animation is not being, it's not being applied to anything. So I want it to be applied to this Trump pose, right? So I'm going to click the hierarchy here. I've got my Trump pose. You can see there's a bunch of other things that are kind of, this is the skeleton. There's the model and the skeleton. And I'm going to select it in the hierarchy, and I'm going to go to add component, and it's already, I searched for, you can see I started searching for animation. So I don't want to, I'm not in animation. What I want to add is the animator controller. So I'm going to choose that. Animator Controller. So for a game object, when you select it and in the inspector, it's going to give you when it's nothing is being applied to it, it's just this game object, it's only going to have the transforms, right? But I can add all sorts of things. I can add components, in this case, an animator controller. If I write my own scripts, I would click add component, add those scripts for behavior, etc. So which controller? So I can either click the target or just drag in my controller here. So now it's just idle. If I save this and go back to my scene, it's in the T-pose, but when I run it, it switches to the idle animation, right? So I'm going to stop this and I'm going to build out my animation. So I want to go from idle to getting really worked up, yelling, and I want it to go entry point goes to idle, and then I'm right clicking, so I'm selecting idle. I'm going to right click on it and choose make transition and have it go to yelling. If I wanted to, I could just have it go back and forth between yelling and idle. So if I save this, test it, the idle is a little long. I should have shortened it. So you can shorten the animations in Mixamo. I can also, I think I can probably, yeah, I should be able to shorten them here too. Yeah, the idle is kind of long. Okay, so does this thing. All right, so I'm going to keep going. I want to not just be stuck here, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of yelling idle. And this, I wonder, maybe on PCs, but on the Mac, if I select this transition and click delete, it doesn't do anything. I have to click it here, and where it says transitions, yelling and idle, I have to click the subtract. Now it's gone. Okay, yelling, getting really worked up, to jumping, make transition, and have it go to jumping, and then let's see, idle, jumping, yelling, and I'm going to go ahead and drop in running, but I'm not going to make it part of this because I don't want him automatically running. I want him running when somebody clicks a button to add some interactivity. So all I'm going to do is have this loop between idle, yelling, and jumping by adding a transition from jumping to idle. And if I wanted the entry point to not be idle, I can always set as layer default state. And now the entry is yelling instead of, you can see it's orange, and it goes straight from entry to yelling, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to have it go to idle and then just loop between idle, yelling, jumping, idle, yelling, jumping. Okay, any questions? No, all right.
So, sorry, this view is made possible when you drag that animator asset onto the Trump T-pose box that you have over in the hierarchy?
Well, no. So you can either go to Window and Animation and choose Animator, and then it'll open that tab. So if I close it, so I have my default scene game asset store. So there's two ways. Once I created what the way I opened it in this scenario was I went inside my assets and I went to create and then added where is it? Animator Controller. And I thought it automatically, and then I double clicked into it. So I'm going to delete that.
Got it. Thank you.
But you can also, let me close this again. You can also go to Window, Animation, Animator, and go into it from there. The last one that was open is going to be the one that opens up. That's why this Trump tantrum is open. Any other questions? Okay, so I want to add some interactivity. So I'm going to go to, I'm not going to have it be part of the animation. I'm going to have it be, I am going to have it be part of this container, this animated Trump, which was initially an empty game object. And I'm going to add a user interface element, and it's going to be a button. So you can see that there's text in Text Mesh Pro, and there's button in Button Text Mesh Pro. So from button and text are like the old technology that Unity implemented. Everything should be, when you see either the choice of button or Button Text Mesh Pro or drop down, or for any of these user interface widgets, always use the one that has Text Mesh Pro. So I'm going to add a button, and what happens is, since this is a user interface, it generates a canvas. So think of a canvas as an overlay over your game. So the canvas exists in the 2D world. It's on top of the game. And so, you know, like if you want widgets that aren't moving with your character and in the game space, then you use a canvas to create this overlay. And in it, because it's a button, I went ahead and go back to scene. So the canvas is this giant white rectangle. Oh my God. And there's my button. I think I'm gonna resize it, and also reposition the button. Then, so there's the button, and it has text. So I'm going to go ahead and change my text. So once again, anything in the hierarchy that you select, its properties are going to be in the inspector. Position, scale, rotation, the transformations, and then anything else that's part of it. So the text, I'm going to say go to return. I can change the color. I can change the font. You can, yeah, you can do different things. Okay. All right. So I can change width, make 120, make 100. Okay, so I can make these changes, and see, I'm gonna test it, see where this. Okay, so it's laying on top of him. I'm gonna move him over. In the scene, because it's an overlay, a 2D overlay in a 3D world, the canvas is, and I don't know if you guys can see, but the canvas is basically overlaid over the entire scene, and that's why it looks gigantic. And I'm just gonna move this over, and it's a little tricky thinking about it because let's see, 150 and okay, good enough. Let's see if it's not. Okay, so that's good. Go. I'm going to turn that off. All right, so I want this button to communicate with the game object. So I'm going to add a, oh no, on click. Okay, this is why I chose button. Oh, by the way, you can make your own button, like you could make it in Photoshop or Illustrator, import that as a PNG and just drop it in here. And instead of, this default button. So buttons by default have an on-click state. And it, it's the same, like on-click translates to finger clicking in mobile. So I'm going to go ahead and add an on-click state, and then so the way to think about Unity is like you're patching things to one another. You're making connections from one game object to another game object. And so I want on-click to trigger the running away of this character. So this target, what is it that I wanted to target? Everything that's in my assets is going to become available here, and I can dig around, but I know what I want it to do. I want it to take this Trump T pose, and work with the animation controller that it has attached to it. So I'm going to drag the Trump T pose from the hierarchy into the on-click state for my button. And now when I added the on-click state, it's basically asking, okay, on-click what you wanted targeting. I wanted to target the Trump T pose. If I click the Trump T pose, it has an animator controller. Which animator controller? The one I created, right? I dragged it from here into here. So this is all part of wiring stuff up inside of Unity. And so I'm going to go, okay, so now I've got this object, and all Unity, now that I've patched this object to the on-click state, all the properties that are part of this game object present some functionality. So there's the game object, there's the transforms, but I want to work with the animator, right? That's one of the properties that makes up the Trump T pose because I added an animator to it. So I want it to play, and there's integers, there's strings. If you guys are familiar with variables, I think we talked about variables briefly when I talked about JavaScript. I want it to target a specific string value, which is running. So I'm going to say play, and then it's going to ask what play, and I'm going to type in running, right? Double check that. Let's see if I go to my animator, and yeah, it's called running. So I can just double check it. Paste and copy. The button with the text. Okay, so save that. I'm going to test it. And I have that guy. I hit go, and it jumps. So remember, in the Animator Controller, there's this loop there's this loop that's happening, idle, jumping, yelling, idle, yelling, jumping, blah, blah, blah. And Rennie's just sitting there. But by creating a button and a click state, when when I attach the Trump T-pose game object to the onClick state, all the properties that are available to that game object can then be played with. And specifically, I want to work with the animator. And so that's why I choose animator play string. And that's available because I added an animator to that game object. Okay, now I'm going to copy this button. I'm going to rename this button Go. And then I'm going to copy and paste it. And I want it to be part of the canvas. Okay,